Hello. Behavioral change is an essential component of the Inter-American Development Bank Vision 2025 in important areas such as gender or climate change. The lack of a safe sanitation particularly affects women and vulnerable groups, and contamination of rivers and lakes due to the lack of adequate sanitation has a clear impact on the availability of water resources. It's quite clear that we are far from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals for sanitation by 2030. In just Latin America and the Caribbean region, it is estimated that there is a gap of more than $100 billion in investment. The gap have increased dramatically with respect to the Millennium Goals, and we have moved from an infrastructure perspective to a service perspective that spans through the entire sanitation chain. In other words, to have safe sanitation, all the elements of the sanitation chain must be considered. It should include the containment, the transport, but also the treatment and reuse of excreta. A very lightning example of the difference between providing an infrastructure and providing a service is given in the construction of latrines in rural areas, which in many cases have resulted in them not being used or being used for other purposes like as a storage. The infrastructure, the latrines in this case are in place, but they are not used. So we do not provide the health and environmental benefit we are expecting. This approach based on the provision of services and taking into account the entire sanitation chain is also an incentive to think in an innovative way when seeking solution. The solution to the gap we were talking about at the beginning is not just to invest more in sewers and treatment plants, which are of course necessary, but also to think about other technologies, such as the condominial solutions or the safe management of the individual solution. The safe management of latrines or septic tanks have a lower investment cost than collective solutions, such as conventional sewers, but implies that the entire sanitation chain is managed safely. Research shows in general that most people have environmental and health concerns, but in many cases, this not translate into inappropriate behavior. The emptying of latrines, for example, is done manually by people who do not use any kind of protection. Or septic tanks are emptied by trucking companies that dump the contents into rivers or into the sea without any kind of treatment. But behind these problems, in the decision-making of people, there is people who pays for the uncertified trucks or who pays for unprotected manual emptiers. Individual solutions may be technologically simpler than collective solutions, but they are usually institutionally much more complicated. To begin with, they don't have the homogenizing effect of sewer systems where there is normally a single operator that is usually the water utility. The ecosystem of individual solutions includes solutions built in the most diverse ways, with all the difficulties that this implies in terms of possible contamination of the aquifer or in the feasibility of the sludge extraction. Environmental ministries and municipalities have no clear competences regarding how the system works. Then the application of coercive models, such as fines for not compliance, is in the many cases complicated by the absence of this clear regulator. Here again, we see the massive potential of behavioral change science to get people to contract certified trucks by changing the architecture of the decision-making. An example of the change in the decision-making architecture is the incorporation of the prepayment of septic tanks as a default option in the contract with the water utility. For example, this may include emptying of the septic tank every 3 years, which must be carried out by a certified operator who discharges the sludge into a treatment plant. And now let's make a small historical pause to understand that the decision-making in sanitation has always been had an important weight of unconscious behaviors. For several decades in the 19th century, the miasma theory was little contested despite the weight of evidence against it, and contributed to over 30,000 cesspools, discharging the wastes into the River Thames in less than 10 years. Disgust, as a driver, work in this case in the direction of blaming foul-smelling fumes as the culprit of the cholera epidemic, as opposed to the invisible contamination of water by bacteria. The evolutionary evolved disgust for detecting spoiled food, or other parasites, but work in an maladaptive way in the urban environmentals of high urban densities, such as the 19th century London. Finally, the waterborne transmission pathway theory developed by John Snow was accepted, and now this gas is used together with same, for example, as a potent catalyst for the elimination of open defecation in the case of the CLTS, for example. In the case of the sewer system, one of the problems we often found is that after the constructions, in many cases, people take a long time to connect to the sewer system. It's not uncommon to find that after 5 years of construction, the percentage of households connected does not exceed 20%. And here it's important to keep in mind that when the new project reaches people, they already have a sanitation solution, they may be more or less happy, but they have invested money in this solution. Observing all these houses located on both sides of a water course, with their sanitation facilities discharging their wastewater untreated, is a clear image that there is an implicit social norm that makes this behavior acceptable. In response to the difficulties of providing sanitation in the marginal urban areas due to the high cost of conventional sewer and the difficulties of connecting these areas to the sewer system, condominial sewer where the sanitation was introduced in Brazil in the 1980s. The fact of decreasing the diameters and depths of excavation made it possible to reduce investment costs up to 30% with respect to the conventional systems. In addition to the technical innovation that was very important, there was another innovation that was the way of working with beneficiaries of the projects. The way to make the connection to the system was directly discussed by the technician of the project with the people, with the engineers and social workers, taking the block of houses as the unit of social work. By means of meetings with inhabitants of this housing block, condominium in the condominial way of talking, it was possible to change the social norm through processes involving the creation of a new identity in this houses block and the planning of the solution. As a result, connectivity levels in many cases exceeded 90%, shortly after the startup of the projects. Although the event is focused on sanitation, I believe it's also important to talk about water consumption because of the important consequences it has on sanitation at different levels. It should not be forgotten that in general, it's estimated that 80% of the water consumption returns to sanitation. So a reduction in its value has an important impact on both investment and operating cost of sanitation. Reductions up to 5% have been achieved much more effectively than through price increases through behavioral change campaigns, like the one in Belén in Costa Rica. Given the enormously variety of water consumption between cities, we have here a huge scope for work with the use of behavioral change science with important implications from both the point of view of sanitation and climate change. I believe it is important to emphasize here that water consumption is one of the places where it is more clearly reflected those users of water utilities that are considered as conditional cooperators. And its conditionality of cooperation varies considerably from country to country, depending on cultural factors. This is in line with the need for more studies on the application of behavioral change science in low and middle income countries, and especially in all the behaviors associated that we have seen with the entire sanitation chain. This includes everything from how to get a neighborhood in Tegucigalpa in Honduras connected to the new build sewer system to, for example, lowering the water consumption in Panama and thus the associated sanitation cost. Thank you very much.